I guess going back to the different platforms, was there one that kind of worked best for you? Would there be one you recommend most?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my little history of platforms, I started out blogging. I started in very late 2007. I then moved on to YouTube after that, and I never really treated YouTube like it was a primary platform. That was a big mistake. If I were to treat YouTube like I treat it now back then, I'd be way ahead of the game because no matter what platform you choose, you should go all in on it for sure. And I was just using YouTube as like a repository for a video every few months just because I just was scared of it, really. And then the podcast came out in 2010, and I started the podcast every other week, and I had done that for a few months, and it was hard, and I didn't understand how it all worked, and I was just like, okay, well, I'll try it for a little bit and see what happens. And then I remember going to a conference, and even though I blogged 3 times a week and only podcasted once every other week, so one podcast for every 6 pieces of blog content, when I went to this conference, everybody couldn't stop talking about my podcast. Podcast this, podcast that. And I was like, what about my blog? Like, I'm spending 90% of my time on my blog. Like, what about that stuff? And they're like, no, I don't like that story you told on your show is so great, or that guest you had was amazing. And I was like, wow, okay, I should probably start listening to people and put more time into the podcast versus the blog. So that's what I did. I kind of did flip flop, and I doubled down on the podcast. I cut my blog in half, and then I actually now cut off the blog to just once a week. And the podcast now, my main show comes out once a week. My other show, Ask Pat, comes out once a week. It had come out for 5 days a week for a while, and then I slowed it down. But for me, the podcast really was the big one that allowed me to, in my way, connect with my audience best. Different people connect with different people in different platforms for them. And so what I would recommend for anybody listening, and you, Sharon, is just pick the one that you are most interested in, that you feel like you can have a long-term passion for, that out of all of them, you would wake up in the morning, and even though you don't want to do it, you would still go and do it. And for me, that was podcasting. And that was partly because I was scared of getting on camera, not so much anymore. And right now, like, podcasting and YouTube to me are kind of flip-flopping on my favorite right now because I have a lot of fun with the creative aspects of YouTube. But podcasting is so much easier to produce, but it's only one layer. It's just audio. And findability is terrible on podcasts versus YouTube, which is like, it's a search engine, and there's 500 million active channels, and however many videos are viewed every single second. Versus podcasting, well, there's not as many people there, but that's also great because that means you can stand out. Like, there's less than 1 million active podcasts right now. I mean, the numbers are crazy. So we're just starting out. So if you can get in early on that, that's great. So I would choose either YouTube or a podcast to start as your primary platform. Like, you're building content specifically for that, and you're repurposing your content for the other platforms as sort of secondary places to put those for now. And then what I would do is work hard to get to a point where you have your systems down, you have your procedures down, you have maybe a team that helps you, or maybe not, but you just get so good at how you do what you do there that you get some time back to then start putting some primary time into a new platform so you can start to be everywhere. I used to teach this strategy called Be Everywhere when people saw that I had a blog and I had a video channel and I had a podcast, and it was like, no matter how you consume content, I'm everywhere. Like, there's no excuse not to get me. I remember teaching this in 2011 after I had all these platforms, but I didn't stress the fact that you can and should not have all of them at the same time at the start. You have to pick one, master it, then move on to the next, master it, then move on to the next, which is what I did. Too many people then went, oh, okay, I'm going to start all those things. Plus, I'm going to be on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook all at the same time. And then what happens with their energy? None of those platforms have a chance to do any damage for them in a good way because they're spread so thin. So just choose one and learn everything you can about it. Collaborate with other people there. That's the exciting thing about YouTube. And I know you have YouTube experience with your music. So for you, I would recommend that because you have a little bit of clout there already. And it sounds like with the podcast, it is actually video first and then audio second, which is great. And you can get into a lot of search engine terms and keyword related micro content coming out of your show as well. And yeah, it's just whatever you do, just make sure that you can continue to have fun doing it, because the truth is, if you don't have fun doing it, and it doesn't mean you're going to have fun 100% of the time, but it just means, like, you can imagine yourself doing this for a while, then you'll stick with it and be consistent